Well, hello everybody, and welcome back. This is now Frank's Fridays episode number 7, I believe. And once again, I'm just have to repeat what I've said the last several episodes: how honored and pleased I am with the remarkable number of people that are viewing each of the episodes. I would have never imagined that from the start. Also, I want to go back in case this is the first time that somebody's watching one of these and explain that Ryan has been doing some extraordinary stuff on YouTube himself on his channel, and maybe about 5, 6, 7 weeks ago asked me if I would be kind enough to record a few sessions myself, offering a father's perspective, a parent's perspective on our experiences with Ryan over these 2 decades that have passed. And I said, sure, I'd like to do that. I thought it might be useful, it might be fun. I never anticipated at the time that it would have the incredible number of people that are viewing it every week and the extremely kind comments that people are making after every one of the presentations. So those of you that have taken the time to make comments, my sincere appreciation for your thoughtfulness and your kindness. In any event, when I complete one and a week or two goes by before I record another, I seem to think of things that I may have forgotten from earlier years. And I want to go back and add one story that happened back in 2004 that I had forgotten. At the time, Ryan was in Florida. He had completed a stint at the watershed and was out, but still in Florida. I don't know why he didn't come back to California right away, I don't recall. And I was up in Pocatello, Idaho, which is a long ways from Santa Barbara, where our home is, where I'm sitting right now. But I was up in Pocatello, Idaho. Anybody from that area has probably heard of a health system called the Portnoy Medical Center. And I had been invited up there to provide a teaching session, a training session for some of their senior management and mid-level management. And it was a one-day session from about 8:30 in the morning till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I was in my hotel room in Pocatello. I had woken up on a lovely August morning and had taken my shower and gotten dressed and was just tying my tie before I went downstairs to speak. And my cell phone rings. And it's my wife, Diane, Ryan's mom, calling from California, which is not unusual. Sometimes things come up that she needs to check on me about a certain shopping issue or whatever it may be. But in this case, I pick up the phone seconds before I'm ready to get on the elevator and go downstairs to the ballroom where I'll be speaking. And Diane tells me that she just got a phone call that Ryan had overdosed the night before in Florida. And that very quickly told me that he's okay, that he was brought to a hospital and that he was revived, and they feel he'll be okay and that he'll in fact be discharged either that day or the next day or maybe the day after that, but sometime fairly soon. But the word overdose is not a word that you're comfortable in hearing. And that was very troubling, obviously. And my first inclination was, well, should I get on the first plane and head down to Southeast Florida to be with him? And meanwhile, I'm in Pocatello. One doesn't get from Pocatello to Boca Raton easily or quickly. And Diane convinced me that they said, no, he's okay, and he'll be out of the hospital by the time you get there. So I didn't. But what a surreal day that was. Going downstairs and speaking before a room full of people for that many hours. And what I can really share is that there's this instinctive reaction that goes on, that the show must go on. And you have to carpet, I can't even think of the word. When you put something, put something in a compartment, I can't get the word, but compartmentalize is the word. And strictly focus on what I had to do at that point, knowing that I can't be thinking about what's happening to Ryan at that moment. Got through the day. That night, as I had planned previously, I drove from Pocatello in a rental car up to Missoula, Montana. Had a very close friend that I had been good friends with since kindergarten, a long time ago. And he was up there with these adorable twins who were about maybe 8 years old at the time or so. And I made the trip anyway. Drove up there, a good 5 hours probably of driving from Pocatello to Missoula. Got up there, but very telling was uh, the comfort that I felt later that night when I finally had somebody that I had known my whole life and was very close to, that I could tell the story to and get genuine empathy and understanding. And the message there is how special lifelong friends are. And who's ever listening to this, I'm sure that you have some friends that you've had for a good portion of your life. And that was just a classic example of the comfort that you feel with somebody that, although he's not technically a brother, is in many respects a brother. So that's what happened back then. Now, there's an interesting adjunct that occurred in connection, more than interesting, almost chilling and strange, that happened in conjunction with that. A few years later, 2013 to 2015, we'll hear all about this in future sessions of Frank Fridays. Ryan had a girlfriend that he was with for a few years, and she herself, back in the earlier part of the 21st century, had been involved in an automobile accident and got severely injured. I believe somebody, a friend of hers in the automobile, passed away, and she was actually in a coma for 18 days. Well, it came up that it was about the same time that Ryan had his overdose in Florida. I believe her situation occurred in either Virginia or North Carolina. So we did some research. She knew the date that she had gone into the coma. I did not remember the exact date that Ryan had gone into the overdose situation. But that said, I was able to go through some old emails and identify the date. And extraordinary is that they both went into their respective emergency departments within a couple of hours from one another that morning in August of 2004. I believe Ryan went in around 12:30 and she around 2:30, or vice versa. But how strange is that? And life is really full of these strange twists, even in the darkest of hours. So I did want to share that. So anyhow, now we're back to where I left off in episode 6. And episode 6 sort of ended dramatically because Ryan had received his 2 indictments, and I had met with the attorney, and the attorney had told me, you may remember, that I asked him if 5 years was possible, and he sort of looked at me and said, that would be a very good outcome. So I knew that we were dealing with something that could have severe consequences, not just for Ryan, but for his parents. It was one thing for Ryan to have gone off to various levels of incarceration previous to that may have been a couple months at a time. But something that could be as long as 10 years is earth-shattering for us to go through. So the days that followed that were very interesting. It happened on April 1st, which I believe was a Wednesday. It may have been a Thursday. I think it was a Wednesday. And the very next night, we got together with Jenny, the woman that he was living with, that through Ryan's good graces could have been herself indicted, but he sort of protected her, and she did not. She did not go through it at that point. Subsequently, she got in significant legal trouble a short time later. But in any event, we went out with her the next night. We got a lot of blanks that were filled in. She was actually very, very forthcoming about everything that was going on. And looking back on hindsight, she was very honest about things. And we felt that she was an ally of ours going forward. I remember that Saturday, a couple of days later, being in the backyard in our back deck and talking with one of the attorneys from Bob Sanger's office. And I remember so clearly several of his phrases, such as, this is really pretty serious stuff. So it was sobering. It was a sobering period of time. That next Monday, I was in Denver. I had some business in Denver on Tuesday. I was in Denver on Monday night. Early April, happened to be, anybody's a basketball fan, the night that the NCAA basketball championship was on. I have a real good friend in Denver. So Chuck and I actually sat in a restaurant, had dinner, and watched the game. And then I went to my hotel room to sleep. And that's when it really hit me. Being alone in a different city, in a different hotel room, knowing that Diane was alone back in our house, and knowing that Ryan was alone in a Metropolitan Detention Center in LA where he was being held. I remember how uncomfortable that night was, going through it. So, and then a day or two later, even more things happened, and this was a little bit hazy. Diane and I spoke about it a few days ago, and neither one of us remember all of the details. But you may remember that Ryan was living with Jenny and with another guy in a duplex here in Santa Barbara. And because we knew he wouldn't be coming back anytime soon, Diane and I went over to gather some of his things. And what I remember most of all was that apparently Jenny was there and knew the police were coming for some reason. And I think there was somebody that lived on the other side of the duplex that may have called them when he got a hint that something untoward was going on. And it was just a very crazy situation. And her mother came by, and her mother worked in an administrative capacity in a law enforcement unit here in the Santa Barbara area, and sort of used that to some extent to try to you know put fear into us and our family, actually, which was unwarranted and really didn't ever lead to anything at all. But that said, it was a very strange day. We knew the police were coming. We sensed that Jenny was moving heavy drugs, probably heroin, out to this big box in the garage, and we just didn't want to be around for any of it. But on the other hand, we didn't want to go very far, so we basically parked the car around the corner and waited to see what would happen. And really, I don't recall anything significantly happening. But that said, Jenny apparently thought that I was the person that had called the police. The last thing I'd want to do is either get her in trouble or get Ryan in even more trouble. So clearly I'm not going to do something like that. But apparently she was really upset, and when we went back there, when Diane and I went back there a few days later, they had not only taken everything out of the house, including all of Ryan's possessions, which we found out later a lot of those were being sold at a flea market, but also had really had basically trashed the house. That sinks were pulled out, toilets were pulled out, and because I had co-signed the original lease, I had a few $1,000s of responsibility that there wasn't much of a recourse to not pay. So it was pretty much an ugly period of time. All of that said, this begins a period of time where Ryan is in Los Angeles at the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is in the absolute heart of downtown LA, not very far from the train station. And we visited him frequently. The arrangement was that you have an ID number, and you're either it either ends in an even number or an odd number. And Ryan's number, I believe, was an odd number, and it meant that we could visit him on odd number days of the month, which means every other day, which means basically either every Saturday or Sunday. At times, there were weekends that Saturday was the 31st and Sunday was the 1st, so we got a bonus. We actually, a couple times, I think, stayed down there at a hotel and just went back the next day. But it started a period of time. Ryan was there for about 8.5 months, and nobody ever thought he would be there that long. It was our first hint that things moved very, very slowly in the criminal justice system. But we did go down frequently, and we learned a lot from our experience. While all this was going on, by the way, there was a lot of court time, legal stuff going on, one slow step at a time. But we eventually got there, and he finally got out of us. We were hoping he'd be there for a couple months at most, and it was really, I think, 8.5 months, so it was a long period of time. But we really started to learn a lot of things about what it's like to be not only an inmate at a federal detention center like that, but what it's like being a family member of an inmate. And one of the things that really struck us dramatically then and subsequently at other facilities was that the guards there, the staff there, the administrative personnel there, basically treated everybody the same and not very well. It was not that they treated, one ethnic group, more civilly than another ethnic group. It wasn't that they could tell people's socioeconomic status and treat them differently. It was really that, by and large, that the staff there was extremely rough and rude and condescending, and it was bad enough having to go down for all that. And each visit was, I believe, an hour. I think sometimes they let you stay an hour and a quarter or so. But it's a long drive down, it's a long drive back, especially on a Saturday or Sunday when later in the day the traffic picks up. It takes a long time from the time you arrive there till the time you actually see your your loved one face to face. So a typical Saturday could start at 7 a.m. when we get in the car up here, or even quarter to 7 in the morning. We don't get home till 3 or 4 in the afternoon to spend an hour, hour and a quarter max with Ryan. And I do want to point out, and I think it's really important, that just like every other profession or niche out there, there are good prison personnel and there are bad prison personnel. There are good cops and there are bad cops. There are good people and bad people in virtually every walk of life. And I want to stress that this is not a blanket indictment of all the people we dealt with, but it really did stand out to us that at the Metropolitan Detention Center in LA, we were treated very, very harshly and rudely and very condescendingly. And it's also interesting in that going through that, I could really put myself in the shoes of other people, for example, people of color, and how they're often treated, and how there's an immediate prejudice that may be directed toward them because of the color of their skin. In this case, there was an immediate assumption and prejudice that was being directed toward us because, after all, we were the family of an inmate. How good could we be? One other sort of notable memory of that, of those visits, was unlike later federal prisons that we went to, this is more like long tables, like almost picnic tables, where you would sit on one side and on either side of you would be other visitors visiting other inmates, and all the other inmates would be facing us. I remember very clearly, it was a Sunday. I remember sitting in the MDC and there was a woman next to me and some younger man, probably roughly Ryan's age, sitting across from her. And all of a sudden she takes something out of her mouth, hands it to him, he puts it in his mouth, and I sort of look and say, holy cow, wow. Things like this go on, a foot from me. It was sort of remarkable. So anyhow, that was the experience in going and seeing Ryan in MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center in LA, which is a pretty harsh place. One of those big, tall high rises that probably went 14 stories high with barbed wire and, steel things outside every window and so forth. So that was that. But in any event, I want to fast forward then to December of that year. And a couple things happened in that December. One is that Ryan did not know where he was going to be going. But the one thing that we heard all the time from him is the place he didn't want to go was Victorville. Victorville, about 2 hours and 45 minutes from Santa Barbara, sort of halfway between here and Las Vegas, way over in the eastern portion of California. And apparently a very, very rough, harsh place. And like a lot of federal prisons, there was multiple levels of security there. At Victorville, they had a penitentiary, which is the highest level of harshness. And they had various others, high, medium, and low securities. I think the low were called camps. So Ryan's greatest fear was that he would be sent to Victorville. And one Monday morning, it was probably in early December, maybe late November, I got a call from Ryan. He says, oh, you're not going to believe this. They're not only sending me to Victorville, but it looks like they're going to move me into the federal penitentiary there. And I said, my God, that's as harsh as it gets. And, you're an addict. I mean, that's, it's a disease. You do not deserve to be in that kind of setting, but there's not much I could do about it. It turned out, as I recall, that when Ryan went there, they actually dropped him off in a high-medium security level, not in the penitentiary. So he wasn't at the worst level, but there was a week or so of great anxiety that he was going into that. That said, on Christmas Eve of that year, we were going to visit Ryan on Christmas Day, the next day, December 25th. Obviously, Ryan being in prison, that's what we wanted to do with our Christmas Day. On December 24th, I was working out, and a couple years earlier, I had despite a lifetime of absolutely impeccable health, I had a bit of a heart problem. It was atrial fibrillation. It was something that a lot of people have. It didn't respond to most of the earlier treatments. I had to have some surgery in early 2008. That lasted for a while. That sort of bounced back. So I was still dealing with some AFib at that point. It wasn't pleasant, but it was survivable for me, and just continuing to take meds and try to move forward. On that Christmas Eve, I was working out at the gym that I work out at, And all of a sudden I noticed some very, very strange things when I was doing cardiovascular work of my heart rate. So I knew something was even worse than normal. But it was late in the day on the 24th, and I wasn't going to go to an emergency room. I didn't feel it was life-threatening. It just felt very uncomfortable. So the next day, Diane and I make the drive over to Victorville, and we get there late morning. And I walked in, and I remember very clearly the first thing that Ryan said to me was, "Dad, you look awful." And I apparently looked awful. I was white as a sheet and really was sick. And the thing was, I subsequently found out that it was cardiac myopathy. And cardiac myopathy basically means that you are very limited in passing oxygen from your lungs to your heart. And therefore it's very hard to breathe. And also you become very pale and white. And anybody that's in healthcare that may be listening to this, my ejection fraction was about 23, I think at one point 21%, which is remarkably debilitating. So I had gone into a new level of heart disease where I was dealing with both cardiac myopathy and I was dealing with atrial fibrillation. That April, a few months later, I was seeing a specialist down in LA at UCLA who I respected greatly. He did the first surgery on me and did some more surgeries as well. And talk about memories or clear memories of a moment. He examined me and looked at various x-rays and so forth. And he said, well, it's amazing how physicians can, can remove themselves from the passion of the moment when they explain these things, as I presume they have to do, really. He said, well, here's the deal, that there's 1/3 chance that this is going to turn around at some point and you'll fully recover. There's 1/3 chance that you are going to have to live with it at its current level for the rest of your life. And there's approximately 1/3 chance that you are going to die within the next 12 months. I think he gave me a 90% mortality rate for 1 year down the road. So where do you go with something like this? Well, obviously, or not obviously, but certainly looking back at me, you really spend most of your time thinking about that worst case scenario, that 1/3 likelihood that you're not going to be around in a year. And where did I go with that? Well, I went right to Ryan in my mind. Number one, I didn't want to tell him very much about this because the poor guy is sitting out in Victorville in a federal prison. Things are hard enough for him. And the last thing I want him to do is worry about me. After all, it could resolve by the time he's out. So that was number one. Number two is the great fear that I would pass away before he got out of prison. And how heartbreaking that would be, that I wouldn't spend time with him in the final days or weeks or months. That if he came to a funeral, he would come probably accompanied by guards and in shackles and everything else, and how tragic that would be for him. And then the last thing that really concerned me is a fear that if something like this happened, or even Ryan found out about it, it would be very easy for him to retreat into, I caused this. You know, my bad behavior caused my father to have heart trouble and to lose his life. And that wouldn't have been correct. It wouldn't have been close to correct. My father, Ryan's grandfather, although he made it to the age of 93, had similar heart issues himself. So it wasn't Ryan. It was probably something congenital that I knew was going to ultimately happen in my life. But it was still a very, very difficult thing to go through. So we flash forward again, and meanwhile, we're going back and forth to see Ryan in Victorville over time. And different things happen in Victorville. I remember two stories in particular. One is that we drove there, one of the first or second times we were there, and pulled into the parking lot, and apparently parked in an area that was right next to an area that you shouldn't be walking. And my wife got out first and started walking toward the prison doors, and I was just locking up the car. And literally somebody saw her and walked toward her and pulled a rifle out and pointed it toward her. And anybody that knows Diane knows that the worst crime she's ever committed was to get a parking ticket a couple years ago, which she had guilt about for months, if not years, that followed, and there's somebody pointing a rifle at her. And we both say, "Whoa! We didn't, what did we do wrong?" And they put the rifle down and said, "You can't walk there." So we found another path to walk, and that was the end of that. And then there was another incident that I remember as well, is that we were there one day, and Ryan got in a variety of trouble at Victorville. It was a tough place you have to navigate. He's inherently a pretty gentle guy, not given to fisticuffs or fighting or harshness or anger, sort of diplomatic and very decent. But he got in some sort of trouble. So he apparently owed somebody some money, fair amount, maybe $1,100, something like that. What it was for, I don't know. I think at the time he said it was for gambling. I think maybe later on we found out it may have been drug related. But in any event, one day we were visiting him there, and there was somebody else in the visiting room, another inmate, an older man, probably maybe 60 or in his 50s, that looked like sort of a mediator, a peacemaker amongst the inmates. And he somehow, you're not supposed to do this, but somehow Ryan got him to speak to us while we were there visiting Ryan. And what he basically said is, listen, Ryan's going to tell you this, but I want to tell you as well that if he's not able to pay off this $1,100 debt very quickly, then he can get, he's really going to get badly hurt. So it puts a parent in a very difficult situation. We have to make a decision whether to give him that money or not. And it's a hard one, because in one sense you just can't keep on doing that. Of course, you're just encouraging that behavior. On the other hand, what if you don't? What if he does get badly hurt, and how painful that would be for us as parents? So we ultimately made the decision that we would let him know that we're not going to be doing this again. Went to a local Del Taco, which was our fallback place where we ate when we were in Victorville, and I had to get on the phone with Western Union, and we transferred the money. But it was a very difficult decision, and another example of how a parent can get pulled into these things unwittingly and have to make some very difficult decisions over time. So in any event, let's take us into November of 2010, and Diane and I took a little vacation. We were in Kauai, and because I had traveled so much professionally and still was traveling a lot, we were able to use free airplane tickets and free hotel points and all, so very easy vacation. So we're in Hawaii, and one morning we're going into a little rural place, and if anybody that knows Kauai knows that it's sort of rural, and it's not like Maui or Oahu by any means. So we were going to this little breakfast place, and the phone rings, and it's somebody from Victorville, another inmate, calling me. Says, "Hey, I'm a friend of Ryan's. He told me to call you. He just got moved out today, and he is on his way to Oxford, Wisconsin," which was great news because we had heard of Oxford, Wisconsin, and we knew it was, all things considered, a pretty civil, quiet, peaceful place. And there was also an RDAP, which is, I believe, recreational drug and alcohol program there, where it's a rehabilitation thing, and if you go through it, you can get some time off your sentence. So another reason Ryan and his parents wanted him to go to Oxford. So in any event, he told me he's on his way to Oklahoma City, and Oklahoma City was sort of like the O'Hare of Con Air, got that backwards, where you go there until there's enough people there to fill a plane to take you to your next destination. And notably, it was it was like this little prison, or perhaps a medium-sized prison, right on the tarmac, right on the runway there in Oklahoma City. And Ryan was there for a while, a couple weeks, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks, even 3 weeks, before he finally got moved up to Oxford a little bit later. But in any event, to end the session, November 30th, a date that I remember well, just like I remember some dates in a less than positive vein, like April 1st when Ryan's indictments came down. November 30th, 2010, I remember for good reasons. I was visiting my local cardiologist, primary care cardiologist here in Santa Barbara, went through some more tests, as I would routinely do about once a month, and was sitting in his office waiting for him. And he came in, and the first thing he said is, "Frank, I don't have good news for you. And I said, oh, and my heart fell. And about half a second later, he says, I have great news. You are perfectly okay now. And my first question was, what does that mean? Does that mean you can come back tomorrow? And he says, no, you have no more probability than anybody else of the cardiac myopathy coming back. It resolved itself on its own, essentially 11 months later from when it first kicked in. So if you're a poker player, it's called drawing an inside straight. One chance out of three, and I got it, thank God, for so many reasons. And for myself, for my wife, and for my son in particular, it was a great gift from God that I was well, and I've been well ever since. So, and that's 9 years ago now, so a long time ago. So with that, I want to sign off, and I look forward to seeing you again next week in episode number 8 of Frank's Fridays. And again, thank you so much. You're great. Appreciate it.
Palabra.